Imagine you are sitting across from someone you've known for years. A friend, maybe. Someone who smiled at your wedding, who borrowed money when things were hard, who knew your secrets. And then one day, quietly, without warning, that person used everything they knew about you to get ahead. Not out of cruelty. Not out of anger. Simply because it was convenient. Simply because the opportunity was there. And you're left sitting with a question that feels almost too uncomfortable to ask out loud. Was any of it real? Or were you just useful? This is the question Niccolò Machiavelli spent his entire life trying to answer. And the conclusion he arrived at, the one that disturbed scholars, rulers, and philosophers for centuries, is still disturbing us today. He said, never trust anyone. Not entirely. Not unconditionally. And the reason he said it had nothing to do with bitterness or cynicism. It had everything to do with something far more unsettling. He believed he had simply looked at human nature, honestly, without illusion, and told the truth. But here is what most people get wrong about Machiavelli. They think he was teaching the powerful how to manipulate the weak. They think he was some kind of cold-blooded strategist writing a manual for tyrants. The real story is far stranger. Far more personal. And far more psychologically revealing, not about rulers, but about all of us. Because the question Machiavelli was really asking is the same one you've probably asked yourself in the dark, after a betrayal you didn't see coming. Why do people act the way they do when something is at stake? Machiavelli was born in Florence in 1469. He spent his career as a diplomat, a man who sat in rooms where kings and cardinals made decisions that changed the shape of empires. He watched people negotiate, promise, betray, conspire, and reconcile, only to betray again. He didn't read about human behavior in books. He watched it happen in real time, at the highest levels of power. And what he saw terrified him, not because people were uniquely evil, but because they were predictably self-serving. Not maliciously. Not even consciously, most of the time. People simply moved toward what served them. Toward what protected them. Toward what advanced them. And when loyalty conflicted with self-interest almost always won. He wrote a short book called The Prince. It was supposed to be a gift to a new Florentine ruler. A practical guide to keeping power in a world where power was constantly being taken. But what he accidentally wrote was something far more dangerous, a psychological portrait of the gap between how people present themselves and how they actually behave. And that gap, that space between the public face and the private motivation, is what makes his warning about trust so worth examining. Think about the people in your own life for a moment. The ones you trust most. Now ask yourself, how much of that trust is based on who they are, and how much is based on who they have been allowed to be? Because here is the uncomfortable truth that Machiavelli kept circling back to. Most people are loyal as long as loyalty is comfortable. Most people are honest as long as honesty is safe. Most people are kind as long as kindness costs them nothing. The moment the stakes change, the person you thought you knew faces a choice you never anticipated. And the frightening part isn't that they might choose against you. The frightening part is that they might not even feel like they're making a choice. Self-preservation doesn't feel like betrayal from the inside. It feels like survival. Machiavelli watched this happen to himself. After years of loyal service to the Florentine Republic, a new regime came to power. He was arrested. Tortured. Exiled to a small farm outside the city. The people he had served, the institutions he had believed in, the networks he had built over a lifetime of careful relationship, none of it protected him when the political wind shifted. And this is where his psychology becomes fascinating. Most people, after an experience like that, become either broken or bitter. Machiavelli became something else. He became a careful observer of the mechanism underneath human behavior. He stopped asking, why did they do this to me, and started asking, under what conditions do people always do this? That shift, from personal wound to structural understanding, is one of the most intellectually courageous things a person can do. And the answer he found wasn't flattering. He concluded that people are fundamentally driven by two forces, the desire for security and the desire for advancement. When those two things align with their relationship to you, they will be loyal, generous, and trustworthy. When those two things conflict with their relationship to you, they will, usually, find a way to justify what they need to do. This doesn't make them monsters. It makes them human. But understanding this changes the way you hold trust. And this is the part that most people miss when they dismiss Machiavelli as cynical. He wasn't saying don't form relationships. He wasn't saying don't love people. He wasn't saying walk through life armored and alone. He was saying something more subtle and more important. He was saying don't confuse affection for reliability. Don't confuse someone's good behavior in easy circumstances for a guarantee of their behavior in hard ones. The psychologist Abraham Maslow built an entire theory around a similar idea. When basic needs, safety, belonging, security, are threatened, almost everything else gets reorganized around protecting them. The part of a person that loves you genuinely doesn't disappear. But it moves lower on the hierarchy for a while. And in the meantime, the part of a person that needs to survive takes over. Machiavelli just said the same thing 500 years earlier, without the clinical language. He said, don't give anyone so much power over your fate that their moment of fear or ambition can destroy you. There is also something worth understanding about the stories people tell themselves when they drift away from their own values. Human beings are not built for guilt. We are built for coherence, for a stable story about who we are and whether we are good. So when someone does something that conflicts with their self-image, the mind doesn't usually collapse into shame. It rewrites. It finds a reason. It discovers a justification that was somehow always there, waiting. I had no choice. They would have done the same. This is just how the world works. The betrayal becomes logical. The disloyalty becomes wisdom. And the person on the other end of that story, you, becomes a footnote in someone else's survival narrative. Machiavelli saw this everywhere. Not just in palaces and courts, but in the smallest transactions between people. He noticed that human beings have an extraordinary capacity for moral flexibility when their own interests are involved. Not because they are liars, exactly. But because the mind is a storyteller first and a truth-teller second. We construct meaning to protect ourselves, and we do it so seamlessly that we rarely notice the construction happening. This is why the warning about trust runs so much deeper than simple cynicism. It isn't saying that people are bad. It is saying that people are adaptive. And adaptation, by its very nature, is not loyal to anyone outside the self. And here is where something shifts in the way you might hear this message. Because if the warning is real, if people are genuinely subject to these pressures, these unconscious calculations, then the question isn't just who can you trust. The question is also, who have you been? When things got hard for someone you cared about, what did you do? When loyalty to a person conflicted with what was safer, or easier, or more advantageous for you, what choice did you make? And did you even recognize it as a choice at the time? Think about a moment when you pulled back. When you went quiet instead of speaking up. When you let a version of the truth that served you replace the version that would have helped someone else. You probably had a reason. It probably felt reasonable. That is exactly what Machiavelli was pointing at. Not the dramatic betrayals of history. The quiet, ordinary, almost invisible ones that happen every day between people who genuinely care about each other and still, sometimes, choose themselves. This is the part of Machiavelli that most people never reach. Because it's easier to read his work as a warning about other people's betrayal than to read it as a mirror aimed at ourselves. He wasn't writing only about rulers and enemies. He was writing about the condition of being human in a world where resources are limited and consequences are real. He was writing about the gap every person carries between their values and their behavior under pressure. And he was asking, quietly, ruthlessly, whether we are honest enough with ourselves to acknowledge that gap. The deepest psychological insight in everything Machiavelli wrote is not, never trust anyone. That's the surface. The deeper truth underneath it is this: the person you most need to understand is yourself. Because the expectations you carry about other people's loyalty are almost always projections of how you want to see yourself. And when someone fails to live up to those expectations, the pain isn't just about betrayal. It's about the story you were telling yourself, about them, and about who you are to them. Machiavelli's warning wasn't a license for paranoia. It was an invitation to clarity. To see people as they are rather than as you need them to be. To build trust slowly, based on what someone does when it costs them something, not on what they say when it costs them nothing. To stop confusing warmth for loyalty, and loyalty for guarantee. And perhaps most importantly, to hold yourself to the same standard you hold others to. To notice when you are drifting toward what is convenient, what is comfortable, what protects your own position. Not because you are corrupt, but because you are human. And being human means carrying the same mechanisms Machiavelli spent his lifetime documenting. Real trust, the kind that actually holds under pressure, isn't built on feeling. It's built on evidence. It's built on a history of someone choosing honesty when lying would have been easier. Choosing loyalty when distance would have been safer. Choosing you when choosing themselves would have been completely understandable. That kind of trust is rare. It should be rare. And the fact that it's rare is not a reason for despair, it's a reason to recognize it when it appears, and to protect it with the same seriousness you would give anything genuinely valuable. So the next time you find yourself wondering whether you can trust someone, really trust them, don't just look at their history with you. Look at what they do when something important is on the line. Look at how they behave when truth is inconvenient. Look at who they protect when they can only protect one thing. And then ask yourself the question Machiavelli never stops asking. Not whether they are trustworthy, but whether you have been. Because the answer to that question might reveal more about human nature than any political treatise ever written. It might reveal the one person whose loyalty you have the most power to shape, and the most reason to examine. Yourself. Now, before you leave, do one thing. If this video made you see even a little more clearly, don't keep it to yourself. Send this to someone who still trusts blindly, someone who keeps getting used and doesn't even realize it yet. Not as a suggestion, as a wake-up call. Because one right idea, at the right time, can change how someone sees the world forever. And if this actually made you think, prove it. Hit the like button. Not for me, but as a signal that you're starting to see what most people ignore. And go to the comments and write this. I don't trust blindly anymore. Because the moment you say it, you start seeing differently. And if you haven't subscribed yet, fix that. Because the way Niccolò Machiavelli saw the world, wasn't comfortable, it was real. And that's exactly what we do here. We don't comfort you, we show you how things actually work. Stay sharp. Stay aware. Stay unreadable. I'll see you in the next one.